How do you want your life to end? I mean, it's probably one of the most personal and, let's be honest, toughest questions anyone can face. So today, we're going to unpack the really complex and deeply human arguments for legalizing euthanasia in South Korea. It's a debate that's all about dignity, choice, and what it really means to live a good life, right to the very end.
This book title, wow, it just cuts right to the heart of a fear so many people have. It's not really about death itself, right? It's about the process of dying, the fear of a painful, drawn-out, undignified end. And that really sets the stage for our whole conversation. In a country where life can feel so hard, does dying have to be miserable too?
So to really get into this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at the right to a good death as a constitutional question. Then we'll ask why hospice might not be the whole answer. We'll tackle those big what-if fears head-on, look at the government's role in all this, and finally, talk about what it means to choose your own grand finale.
Okay, so let's start with the legal stuff, because the people who support this aren't saying we need to invent a new right. They're arguing that this right already exists, right there in South Korea's constitution.
And this is where it gets really interesting. It all comes back to Article 10, the right to pursue happiness. Now think about that for a second. If you're trapped in a body with an incurable disease, facing nothing but unbearable pain, isn't a peaceful death the only path left to pursue happiness? Or at the very least, to escape a state of profound unhappiness? It's a powerful argument. And, this isn't just talk. This is a real constitutional petition that's been filed. The argument is basically that by not creating a legal pathway for euthanasia, the government is actually violating this fundamental right. It completely flips the script. The question isn't, should we allow this? But is it unconstitutional to forbid it?
Now, usually the first thing people say is, wait a minute, don't we already have a system for this? What about hospice? So let's take a closer look at that.
So isn't that the whole point of hospice and palliative care? To manage pain, to provide comfort at the end of life? And look, for so many people, these services are an absolute godsend. But the argument we're exploring today says they're just not a complete solution for everyone. Well, the first big hurdle is just getting access. In Korea, the rules for hospice are incredibly strict. You pretty much have to be in the final stages of dying, and you have to have one of just a few specific diseases, like cancer or COPD. This leaves a huge group of people out, people with diseases like ALS or Huntington's, who might face years of unimaginable suffering but aren't considered terminal yet. And then there's the second issue. Is it always enough? Even in the best systems, palliative care can't solve all suffering. A 2019 report from the UK, a country with a really strong hospice system, found that for 21% of patients, their pain just wasn't relieved. Think about that. That's more than 1 out of every 5 people. This analogy is just so vivid and powerful. It gets right to the core of the debate. Palliative care is the painkiller you're offered while you're on that conveyor belt to make the terrible journey a little less agonizing. But euthanasia, its supporters say, is the choice to get off the conveyor belt entirely. It's the difference between managing the pain and actually being free from it. Okay, so this whole topic, of course, brings up some really big, understandable fears. The what-ifs. So let's not shy away from them. Let's tackle them directly.
The number one fear is always the slippery slope, that if we allow this, it'll lead to abuse and people being euthanized against their will. But it's fascinating to look at the Netherlands. They didn't legalize it out of nowhere. It was already happening, underground, with no rules. They created a law to prevent abuse by bringing it out into the open with super strict regulations and oversight. So the argument is that a good law isn't the slope, it's the guardrail.
Then there's the fear that it would create a so-called culture of suicide. But, well, a look at the data gives you a major reality check. South Korea, where euthanasia is illegal, has the highest suicide rate in the OECD, by a lot. And countries that have legalized euthanasia, they're not at the top of that list. It suggests the real driver isn't the legal options you have, but the unbearable suffering you don't. And what about protecting the most vulnerable? This is absolutely critical. South Korea has the highest rate of poverty among the elderly in the OECD. So the concern that someone might feel pressured into this choice is very real. Any law would need an unbelievably strict review process to make sure no one is being coerced. But what's really interesting is data from California. It shows that Korean Americans, who do have a high suicide rate, actually choose medically assisted death less often than other groups. It suggests there isn't some automatic line between being vulnerable and making this choice. So all this brings us back to the government's role and to a key legal idea that says doing nothing is actually a choice and potentially a failure.
The term for it is legislative omission. It sounds kind of academic, but the idea is pretty simple. It says that if the Constitution gives people a fundamental right, the government has a duty to actually pass laws to protect that right. Just not doing anything isn't a neutral option. It's a failure to do their job.
And here's the bottom line on that. By not creating a safe, regulated legal pathway for euthanasia, the state is effectively leaving its citizens stranded in their suffering. The argument is that this inaction is a direct failure to protect the right to pursue happiness for every single citizen, especially those who are in the most pain.
Okay, let's bring all these threads together now and talk about the final, most personal argument, that this is really less about death and more about having control over the last chapter of your own life story.
This is such a profound insight. Lawmakers in places that have legalized euthanasia noticed something amazing. For many patients, the biggest sense of relief didn't come from actually using the option, but from just knowing it was there. Just knowing you have an escape hatch, that you have some control if things get too unbearable, that knowledge itself acts like a form of pain relief.
And that's really what it all comes down to, this idea of self-determination. It's the chance to plan your goodbyes, to prepare for the end with a clear mind, to write a dignified final scene for yourself, instead of letting a disease write a long, painful one for you. It's about being the author of your own grand finale.
This quote from Isaac Asimov just says it all, doesn't it? Life can be good. Death itself can be peaceful. The truly hard part, the part that causes so much fear and suffering, is that transition, that often messy, difficult, and painful journey between the two.
And so that leaves us with one final essential question. If that transition really is the hardest part of all, who should get the final say in how that journey is made? The individual living it or the state? That's the question that societies everywhere, including South Korea, are now facing.